And so it comes from what's in the name, Anderson Township. That is our map of Madison County, and you can see Anderson Township where it lies within the scope of all of the townships. Interesting, our county filled like a glass of water fills from the bottom up. So these townships up here were the last ones to fill, and specifically a reason for that deals with the Miami Indians, but when we get there, I'll tell you about that. That's going to keep you coming back, I hope. Anderson Township is one of the first 5 to be organized in Madison County sometime between 1823 and 1829. Its shape is a perfect square, being 6 miles in length and 6 miles in width. We don't know for sure the organization date of the first 5 townships in Madison County, those being Fall Creek, Adams, Anderson, Greene, and Jackson. We do not know the organization date because that information was in the courthouse that burned down on December the 10th, 1880. But what I did find was a report of the Madison County Commissioners, some minutes from a meeting that they held in January 1829 where they mentioned those 5 townships. So I know they were organized sometime between when the county was organized and the date of that meeting. This is Anderson Township. It takes its name from the Delaware Indian chief, William Anderson, or Kick-the-Weena, whose village was located along the White River from 1798 to 1821 in what is today downtown Anderson. 2 years after the Delaware departed this area, Madison County was formally organized, and Anderson Township soon after that. That is Chief Anderson. Born around 1755 in the Pennsylvania colony, he was Delaware tribal chief from 1806 to 1831. I found that picture in a history book of Tennessee history, believe it or not, but it was identified as I have it there. I've shown that picture to 4 of his great-great-great-grandsons. And of course they have no idea what he looked like, so no comment on them there, but that is supposedly what he looked like. He died in 1831 in the Kansas Territory. Wappamensink, Anderson's Town, and Anderson Town. My arrow points, of course, to Anderson. The Delaware called their village Wappamensink, meaning chestnut tree place, because of the once numerous trees of that variety found in the area. The traders and trappers who frequented the village gave it the name Anderson's Town, which, after the Delaware departed, was called Anderson Town. And you see references here. This is an 1839 map to the Anderson Town. Here you see Anderson and then a separation with a capital T and another 1839 map. That is a chestnut tree. And this area, from what I can determine, was thickly populated with chestnut trees at the time that the Delaware lived here. People our age are familiar with the Dutch elm disease that wiped out the Dutch elm. Well, there was a similar blight that wiped out the chestnut trees in the 1920s, and that's why they no longer exist, although there is now a strain of that has been developed in Pennsylvania, and it is now, we have some planted here. When I was on the city's Sesquicentennial Commission, we planted 150 of those around the city to repopulate it with chestnut trees. The village of Chief Anderson extended from where the Madison County Jail is today over to the courthouse and down to St. Mary's Church and then along the White River. That area, about 30 acres, was his village at its largest. When he first settled here, according to his son, Sarcoxy, he had about 15 or 16 families that came with him, and they settled here. A Baptist minister came through here in 1819, and he estimated the village size at about 1,000. St. Mary's Church would have been the one end of it. It would have been in this area here, and the other end would have been about where the jail is. Put them side by side, you can see it stretched. And interestingly, the ground height was the same level as the jail and the St. Mary's Church is today. This has all been excavated for street development and so forth later years. But this was all a bluff that stood 75 feet above White River. Anderson. The name remained until the winter of 1844 when it began to seem unnecessarily long and cumbersome, oftentimes requiring needless repetition, as in speaking, I'm from the town of Anderson Town. So, it was deemed advisable to secure by legislative authority a modification of the name. You can't just change the name of your city. You've got to go through the Indiana legislature to do that. Town leaders James Hazlitt and Robert N. Williams petitioned the Indiana legislature for that purpose, and during the 1844-1845 legislative session, an act was passed changing the name to Anderson. These are the two men that were responsible for that, and James Hazlitt was our 8th mayor, 1878 to 1881, and Robert Williams was our 1st mayor, 1865 to 1866. He was not elected. He was not elected. There was no election. He was appointed by the state legislature to be mayor. And then henceforth, when the 2nd mayor came up, there were elections. But all of our officials to begin with, because there was no organized election process, the state legislature appointed all of those. Greenstown. Greenstown was an Indian village that received only mention in our history books. It was a village of the notorious and apparently brutal Delaware chief named Captain John Green, who was the son of a French fur trapper and a Delaware Indian woman. His village was located in what is today Anderson's Maze Park and straddled a creek that once flowed through there, later called Green's Branch. And I've got a Google Earth shot of that today. It doesn't look like this anymore because of the improvements that the city made in a new park down there, but this was taken before that. But this is Maze Park, and this is where Captain Green's village was located, and a ground shot showing you the same. This dip in the pavement here in 10th Street is where the stream flowed. The Moravian Mission, or Little Muncie Town. Missionaries from the Moravian Church in Pennsylvania established a Moravian mission on the banks of White River, 2 miles east of Wapminsink, from 1801 to 1806. The settlement contained several log houses, Indian huts, and outbuildings. At the height of its population in 1802, the mission station numbered 23 people. And they were located here. This is Scatterfield Road. This is Mounds Mall, White River. This is Panorama Heights. And this is the Shrine Club. And just down from the Shrine Club here in Linwood Drive is where that mission station was located. In 1821, a government survey map located the Indian village, Little Muncie Town, on the former mission site. You see the missionaries, when they conducted their missionary work, they had Indians come and live with them. Some stayed, some left, but they established their own Indian village right beside it, and they called it Little Muncie Town. That is a corruption of Muncie, our neighbor to the east. Traces of these early settlements have disappeared. You see, this is a surveyor's map that he did in 1821, and you see the dots here indicating the little village of Little Muncie Town. And I know you can't read it, but when you blow that up, that says mound. That's the Great Mound in Mounds Park. And you see a reference here to the Little Muncie Town. And again, on a Connors, John and William Connors map of their holdings here in central Indiana, you see the reference there as well. And that is Linwood Drive. I have to laugh every time I show that. I was doing the story about the Moravian Mission one evening over at the Chesterfield Church of God. And I had this up, and I turned around, and I heard a woman scream. Now, that doesn't happen all that often, so I immediately spun around. I thought, uh-oh, what did I do? And I said, what's the matter? And she says, that's my house. That's my house. Moss Island Mills or Toad Level. Now, how would you like to be from Toad Level? It's here. Again, here's Anderson. Toad Level or Moss Island Mills are here. A community called Moss Island Mills was present in 1846. It was clustered around the grist and sawmills by the same name. It was the center of commerce west of Anderson for a number of years. The neighborhood around the mills was also known as Toad Level. One can only speculate that the origin of the odd name was linked to the abundance of such critters that called the nearby White River Dam and Mill and Tail Races home. This is an artist sketch of that old Moss Island mill, and then the mill owner's home. He also served as a collector for tolls, because this road that went from Anderson to Perkinsville was known as the Perkinsville Turnpike. And you had to pay to ride on that, and you paid your fee to him. Here's Romine Road. Here's Moss Island Road, and that's right here. That's that area today. Omaha. Omaha was here. Omaha was located today where 38th Street crosses the CSX Railroad. I'm sure you've all been to that intersection. Eli Guston operated a sawmill, and George Darrow kept a store there at one time. It was a thriving little place and served as a trading post for the neighborhood. Omaha was there in 1851 when the Indianapolis and Bellefontaine Railroad first arrived in Anderson. That was the first railroad to come to Anderson. Started out of Indianapolis, and it came up through Pendleton to Anderson, then went east through Chesterfield, over to Union City, and to Bellefontaine, Ohio. It was recorded that anxious citizens of Anderson walked from the town, that'd be Anderson, out to Omaha to greet the arrival of the first train from Indianapolis on June the 19th. It was a special train. The engine looked like the old Tom Thumb engine with the big boiler on the front of it, smoke rolling out of it, and then you had 3 open-air cars, and those were all loaded with railroad officials coming up. It took them 3 hours to get from Indianapolis to Anderson. The settlement was established sometime before the railroad was built, and with the disappearance of the timber in the area and the closing of the sawmill, Omaha ceased to exist. I'm talking about this intersection here. Here's Rabel, here's 38th Street, here's the CSX Railroad, and it was in this wooded area right here that the little town of Omaha existed. Boxtown. That brings a smile to my face. Boxtown was here on the east side of Anderson, right down along the river, right across from where Edgewater Park is today. Another settlement that no longer exists was called Boxtown. In the 1890s, this neighborhood was located between Cincinnati Avenue and the White River, immediately southeast of our city. It was called Boxtown because nearly all of the residents' houses were built of dry goods boxes procured from Anderson stores. Some of the more dignified or more important ones were made of piano cases, and they were even wallpapered on the inside. Pretty fancy. Outside, they were surrounded with grass plots and shrubs of various kinds in an effort to improve the otherwise unattractive appearance. The area was populated by roughs, most of whom were itinerants, tramps, or bums who regularly caused trouble and were the subject of many local police investigations. And I've looked through a number of police reports where they had to go down there and calm down some kind of disturbance that was going on in that area in the 1890s. To locate it for you, here's Edgewater Park, Park Place. Here's Cincinnati Avenue. This is Prospect Street, and Boxtown was at the end of Prospect Street, just where it goes to the river. This is what it looks like today. And this area here. Now, I got 2 stories to tell you. Get ready to laugh. In that area, there lived a man and woman. We'll say they're married, I don't know. But anyway, they lived together in one of those boxes. And he went by the name of Bluebeard. And he was the unofficial mayor of Boxtown. He was a rag picker. You know what rag pickers are? He made a living by taking a cart and going through downtown Anderson and picking up anything such as rags, glass, metal, anything that could be turned into money to be recycled into something else. That's how he made his money. Guess who pulled the cart? Ladies. Every morning, they'd exit from their palatial estate. She'd step between the bars of the cart and pick it up, and she pulled the cart through town as he threw rags and bottles and everything else on it. I don't make this stuff up.
So she was the first lady.
She was the first lady. Good. Yes. The police described the interior of their box. They had an open stove that had no smokestack on it, so the smoke just rolled out into the. I won't go any further. It's bad. But I can tell you this: that we had a tremendous flood here in 1904, topped only by the 1913 flood, and the river got up into this area, probably even more higher. And the police went down there to warn the residents of Boxtown, you better get out. Well, they knocked on one of those wooden doors, or cardboard doors, and 4 men were sitting inside the box playing poker. The officer who was there to warn them was standing in water. And they told him, it's too soon to go, we got a card game going on. Like I said, I don't make these things up. Half Mountain. The area contains steep hills which led down to the river, or the area residents called one hill Half Mountain. It was very popular on a snowy winter's day. To get to the hill from Cincinnati Avenue, kids used a little-known path known as Rocky Lane that ended at Miller Avenue. Miller Avenue is still there today. From there, it was a smooth sailing as long as you smooth sledding as long as you stopped short of the river, situated not far from the bottom of the hill. And I'm talking about here's Cincinnati Avenue, here's White River, here's Edgewater Park, and this hill is right here, and I'll show it to you. This is the bottom of the hill. And what that is, that's an extension of Columbus Avenue. You all know Columbus Avenue on the other side of Ohio Avenue that goes south. Well, it also goes north, and it comes down to the river. And the kids would get up a good sled ride, and as long as they rolled off the sled before it went in the river, they were okay. Buzzard's Roost. Now there's a return address. This area, in this same area was another locality with a rather unglamorous name of Buzzard's Roost. It was the area along the Pennsylvania Railroad tracks where they crossed Wheeler Avenue. We can only assume why. And to locate that for you, here's Cincinnati Avenue, here's Wheeler Avenue. This was Buzzard's Roost. Here again is Edgewater Park, and if you go on around, this is where Comcast. So you with me where we're at? St. Mary's Church. This was Buzzard's Roost, and it's kind of an elevated spot there. The Acre. Yeah, now I hear muttering. You're familiar with that, aren't you? Ethnic background and industry played a key role in the creation of some of our neighborhoods. The Acre was the name given to the area between 32nd and 38th Streets east of Columbus Avenue on Anderson's southeast side, where a number of Polish immigrants settled who came to the city during the gas boom. Many were employed by the Arcade File Works, later to become Nicholson File. And I'm talking about this is 32nd Street, here is Scatterfield, here's 38th Street, and here's Columbus Avenue. This is the Acre. It has another name, which we'll get to in just a moment. Signage in Pulaski Park tells you about the Acre. And I'm glad I got that picture, because that's no longer there. In 1934, they built their own meeting hall in which to recall and observe their ancestral heritage and named it the Polish Club. Over time, the name Polish Club was used interchangeably when referring to the Acre. I've done it, you probably have too. Well, this is the Polish Club. And I'm not sure if any of you have your cars parked out in front of the Polish Club, but you know, you might. This is Friday afternoon about 1:30. North Anderson. Another industrial area was North Anderson, which began to flourish soon after the discovery of natural gas in the late 1880s. It was annexed by the city of Anderson in 1923, taking in over 3,000 residents. That is the largest annexation the city of Anderson has ever conducted. Irondale. Irondale takes its name from the ironworks once located in the neighborhood that nestled into the area near White River along East 18th Street from East Lynn Street to Scatterfield Road. And I'm talking about, here's Cincinnati Avenue, here's 18th Street, here's Scatterfield Road, and here's White River. This is Irondale. A map dated 1901 that shows you the plats for home lots in Irondale, all down in this area. A railroad spur came off of the main Big Four line and came down here and around to the plant to pick up and deliver goods. The old ditch, Stanley Ditch, that runs through there, still goes through there today. And this is a insurance map of the Gould Steelworks that were located, and that was the employer for the people that lived in Irondale. That's what brought them to Irondale, was work, and then they lived in homes around that. Signage for Irondale. And a little church in Irondale. I thought that was a neat little building. I took that shot. Edgewood. Edgewood took its name for the wooded area that once bordered its east side. In the early 1920s, Wade Donnelly subdivided his land and started Edgewood for housing development. R.R. Byram built many of the homes in the area commonly known as Old Edgewood. The town of Edgewood incorporated in 1930. Edgewood's got an interesting beginning because in 1928, the Mounds Amusement Park was closing. And the Union Traction Company, the interurban folks, they owned that ground. And having no use for it any further, they put it up for sale. General Motors had arrived in Anderson in January 2 years earlier in the presence of Delco Remy. And they were looking for places to build homes for their executives. And as you know, if you've been to Mounds Park, it's a beautiful area, very attractive for home lots. C.E. Wilson owned some of the ground that was the Mounds Amusement Park. He was negotiating with GM. But there was an organization in Anderson that was a little bit sharper. It was called the Madison County Historical Society. They jumped in and said, that's not going to happen. And so they were instrumental in influencing the county council to raise the funds to buy the land before GM could buy it. And that's what happened. And the provision that the Historical Society put on all that transaction was that the land was to be donated to the state of Indiana for use as a state park. This is Old Edgewood, this is South Edgewood. Signage for Edgewood. Park Place, Johnstown, Scabby Hollow. Now I don't know what's worse, Buzzard's Roost or Scabby Hollow or Toad Level. You take your pick. Before it was Park Place, the name that first appears on an 1895 map and thought to describe its park-like appearance, it was known as Johnstown, a name honoring the Pennsylvania town destroyed by floodwaters in 1889. Now, if you know your U.S. history, in 1889 in Pennsylvania, there was an earthen dam holding back a large reservoir of water with this little town of Johnstown at the base of it. Heavy rains swelled the water coming into the reservoir and put so much pressure on the earthen dam that it cracked. The floodwaters came out of that reservoir, submerging the town of Johnstown and drowned 2,000 of the residents almost immediately. The country was feeling empathy for those folks, and so you can find about that time in various states towns renaming themselves Johnstown. Johnstown. And that's what happened here. We called it Johnstown in memory of those people who lost their lives. It was a good move because before that it was known as Scabby Hollow. Immediately after the tragedy, either naming or renaming a town Johnstown was a common practice across America to remember the 2,209 victims of that tragedy. 50 years earlier, though, the area was called Scabby Hollow, a name given to the area where the canal diggers lived in shanties during the late 1830s. And there are some really interesting stories about when the canal workers were here. As I say, they lived in shanties over there where Athletic Park is, and the lower part of Park Place, what we know as Park Place today. Those were all canal diggers. It was temporary housing because as they would build sections of canal, they'd move on. And so they were just temporary, so hence the name Scabby Hollow or shanties. Those folks didn't get along with each other. With a name like Scabby Hollow, renaming it Johnstown was probably a welcomed change. Signage for Park Place, and you see Park Place today. Have you ever wondered why Grand Avenue doesn't conform to the traditional north, south, east, west? It was a canal and they filled it in and paved it. But before they filled it in and paved it, it was never used as a canal. It was dug for a canal, but the canal didn't work, so they abandoned it. And the school children, or the children of Park Place, put swings and slides up down there. And in the wintertime, when that ditch would fill up, the canal would fill up with rainwater and melt and freeze, they ice skated. So it was a playground for the children of Park Place. In the 19th century, railroads, and speaking of canals, railroads and a canal were responsible for the development of several communities in Anderson Township. As the population grew, people looked for better ways to move about. And with that came growth. Growing speculation in the late 1830s over the construction of the Indiana Central Canal, not the other canal that we mentioned just now, the hydraulic canal, but growing speculation over the Indiana Central Canal through Madison County was responsible for the formation of two of our communities. And that is what's left of the feeder branch of the Central Canal that was to connect Anderson with Muncie. And that remained unknown until I was out there one day with the property owner who also has a portion of the hydraulic canal on his property. And we were walking along and he kept saying, now the other canal, the other canal. And I thought, what are you talking about, the other canal? And he says, there's another canal down there. And I said, show it to me. So we went down there. I stepped into that, my jaw dropped open. And I said to him, I said, I can tell you right now, you are the only property owner in Indiana that has two canals on your property. Nobody else can make that claim. But that is the old Central Canal that was meant to connect Anderson to Muncie. There is no record of it, by the way. I checked the Indiana legislature to make sure, because the canal diggers turned in all of their work to the Indiana legislature in 1840, called in a completion report, and I checked that thoroughly, and that is not in it. It's been silted in, about 4 feet of silt. It was originally from the top of the tow path here, which the animals would have used to tow the canal boats. From that top path to the bottom would have been 6 feet. 4 feet of water, 4 feet of water. Would have been 26 feet wide at the base and 40 feet wide at the top. That's how it was designed. But you can see clearly the footprint of the canal. Clearly. Victoria. In 1838, while the construction of the canal was in progress, John Renshaw platted a town site across White River where West Maplewood Cemetery is now located. A log cabin was erected and the town was given the name Victoria. A collapse of the finances caused the work on the canal to be abandoned, and the hopes of Mr. Renshaw perished. He subsequently disposed of the land. But this is West Maplewood Cemetery, Alexandria Pike, West Maplewood Cemetery, and standing at the signage for West Maplewood Cemetery, that would have been a town had the canal gone through and would not have been a cemetery. When Anderson Town was first populated, of course, there were deaths. Where did they bury those people? Well, they buried them behind in the area on the hillside where St. Mary's Church is today. And they called that the Bolivar Cemetery because at the time, 10th Street was known as Bolivar Street. And so that's where the cemetery was located. Well, that worked until 1832 when the city decided that it needed that ground for another reason to develop. And so a man by the name of Collins Tharp, who was a member of the Methodist Church, which was located on 11th Street, where Brown, Delaware and 11th Street intersect. He owned that ground, and he said, well, I will donate the ground. Well, there was a church, the Methodist Church sat there. He said, I'll donate the ground behind it, I own it, to be used as a cemetery. So all of those people in the Bolivar Cemetery were exhumed, taken over, and planted in the Tharp Cemetery. This was 1839. That worked until 1863, when the city looked at that ground where the Tharp Cemetery was located and said, that's more profitable as a development than it is as a cemetery. We want to use that. So the decision was made to move them again. And so they chose this area on the north side of Grand Avenue because it was vacant. It was owned by the city, and they called this the city cemetery. And they moved those people there and buried them. So there's people there that have been buried 3 times. 3 times. Now the question was, what's the earliest date in there? Well, the earliest date of a person being buried there for the first time is in the fall of 1863. He was a captain in the Union Army, and he was killed at the Battle of Vicksburg, Mississippi. And they brought his body back here and they buried him there. But there are people in there, obviously, that died in the 1820s and have moved 3 times. Yeah, and when you go in that road, you go back to a circle. The first burials, regular burials, were around that circle, and then they just expanded out. Rockport's up next. Rockport was another canal town, was located in Anderson Township. John W. Alley filed a plat of his town Rockport on July 29th, 1839. A notation that he made on, quote, says, said lots lay on the north side of road leading from Newcastle to Lafayette, Indiana, close quote. Situated 2.5 miles west of Anderson, it boasted of having several houses. Rockport was located on the Strawtown Road, you know it as 8th Street, and a little southeast of the old Moss Island Mills. It never came up to the anticipations of its founder, and the land afterwards passed into the hands of J.W. Sansbury, Sr., who opened a stone quarry on that site. And as a kid, I fished in those stone quarries. And my arrow points to where the Green Lantern sat. Here's Rabel Avenue, here's 8th Street, here's the Conservation Club pond, here's the sewage disposal plant, and Rockport was here because this was a canal town, and the canal was coming along the left bank of the White River, and that's what the area looks like today. Gravel pit. Railroads had a huge impact on Anderson Township. The former location of Omaha, south of Anderson, was the site of a railroad spur which connected the Big Four to a gravel pit on Ridge Road. The area around the railroad switch was called Gravel Pit. Reference to it can be found on county maps dating from 1879 to 1901. And here is one of those maps. You see the name Gravel Pit right here. And we are at the same place where we just talked about, where the Hartley Cemetery is, where Omaha, we're in the same spot, right here. And this was the Big Four Railroad, and there was a spur that went down paralleled 38th Street here to what is Ridge Road, to those gravel pits that were once located along there. And the gravel was harvested from those pits, taken out to the main line, and of course the railroad used that gravel as ballast for its road building. Again, that's what the intersection looks like, the place where Joan's not going to go anymore. Anderson Crossing. I want you to listen to this because this was almost Anderson. Anderson Crossing dates from the arrival of the Cincinnati-Chicago Railway in 1855. The railroad crossed the Indianapolis and Bell Fountain Railroad tracks near the intersection of Ohio, Columbus, and Cincinnati Avenues. Upon the second railroad's arrival, the area became an instant business hub. Now I'm talking about, here's 18th Street coming up from Irondale, here's Cincinnati Avenue, here is Columbus Avenue, here's Mounds Road, and here's Ohio Avenue. I'm talking about this whole area here, and if sometime when you're going down Cincinnati Avenue, check out some of the homes that are further down here. That was Anderson's first area where wealth lived. From there it went to West 8th Street, and from there it's other places today. But that was the first wealthy people in Anderson lived along Cincinnati Avenue. And there was a reason for that. Houses sprang up, and real estate in the vicinity commanded high prices. In 1864, the highest point of business activity was reached when the Bell Fountain Railroad Company built both a passenger and freight depot there. All trains on both roads stopped here, and the place assumed quite a business appearance. See, it was halfway between Cincinnati and Chicago. Anderson was. So a train leaving Cincinnati in the morning or Chicago in the morning going either direction got to Anderson around noontime. People got off the train, went into the hotel, and had lunch. Grain depots were built. A hotel and eating houses were also erected. The hotel burned in 1866, and the Nolan warehouse burned soon after. The Bell Fountain Railroad Company transferred its business to new buildings, 3/4 of a mile west, immediately south of the city. You know those buildings as the depot. It's the ballet theater. A steam sawmill at Anderson Crossing was consumed by fire in 1874. With that, the crossing ceased to be important and passed into Anderson history. But here's the story, the backstory. The people that lived in that area wanted that to be downtown Anderson, the business people, because you had two railroads that crossed there. It was a natural for business activity. And all of the merchants in that area wanted that to be Anderson. Well, the merchants in this part of the town said, no, we want it over here. These people want out, and as to nail that lid in the coffin, they incorporated this town a year later in 1865 and made it the city of Anderson. But it was driven by the folks at Anderson Crossing who wanted to be there. Huron. Huron is here. Construction on the Anderson, Lebanon, and St. Louis Railroad, another railroad, was started in Anderson in 1875. Progress was slow, but construction eventually reached Lapel. In between, there was a freight station called Huron. You see it on a map right here. This is, for those of you that didn't recognize the railroad name, if I said Central Indiana Railroad, would you recognize that? Well, we're talking about what later became Ike Duffy's Railroad, the Central Indiana Railroad. But in the early days, it was the St. Louis, Lebanon, and Anderson Railroad. Here you see another reference to Huron. The station was located on the north side of the track in a triangular-shaped piece of ground that today is bordered by the railroad, more recently called the Central Indiana Railroad, 25th Street, and Layton Road. No explanation for the name of Huron has been found, but what I'm talking about is this little triangle right here. Here's 25th Street, here's Layton Road, here's the railroad, and this little triangular piece of land was once known as Huron. Panhandle Junction. Clear up here at the top of Anderson Township. Anderson Township ends at Cross Street. Above it is Lafayette. And Panhandle Junction is here. This is Cross Street, Indiana Avenue, and over here would be Broadway, and this is North Anderson. You with me? Panhandle Junction was the area where Cross Street crosses two different sets of railroad tracks immediately east of Indiana Avenue. The first railroad was the Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Chicago, and St. Louis, nicknamed at the time the Panhandle. We all knew it as the Pennsylvania Railroad in our lifetime. Construction from Richmond to Anderson was completed in July of 1855. 2 years later, the line was extended to Logansport, and it was during this latter phase that the tracks were laid through that area. However, it was not until 1876 when the tracks of the second railroad, the Cincinnati, Wabash, and Michigan Railroad, were completed to Anderson, crossing the Panhandle tracks just north of Anderson. That railroad there is still there today. It runs along John Street. This crossing was given the name Panhandle Junction. It can be found on county maps ranging from 1879 to 1901. And here you see a reference to Panhandle Junction at that crossing. And another one. And yet a third one. Bradbury. Name Bradbury appears only once, and that was on an 1891 map. It was between the New York Central Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad lines east of Scatterfield in this area right here. This is Scatterfield Road. This is Mounds Road. Bradbury sat between the two sets of the railroad tracks. I contend that the people who lived there had to go nuts with all the train traffic. Because at one time, we had a train traveling through Anderson on an average of every 15 minutes. The valley is next. It's a name given to an area in downtown Anderson where a stream once flowed, carrying water from a pond south of 14th and Jackson Streets to White River. This is interesting. Over time, it had eroded a good-sized gully centered where 11th and Main Streets intersect. Now take your mind to 11th and Main Street. Right here. This is Meridian 11th. Go down, and you go down into a valley, don't you? Do you know that valley is about 12 feet higher than it used to be? They filled all that in. When they I'm going to use the word hogged, when they removed the level between St. Mary's and the jail to reduce that for grading, that part of that dirt came over and filled in what is Main Street to raise that level. The depression that's evident there today, it was estimated to be 10 to 12 feet deeper in a two-block area from 10th Street to 12th Street. And I'm showing you here the pond that was south of 14th Street was a really popular place for kids to swim, fish, and ice skate. And it was known as the Blackbird Pond. And it was basically just north of where St. Vincent's Ascension, or I'll call it St. John's for us old-timers. St. John's is located, and that was where the Blackbird Pond, and that was a spring-fed pond, and over the centuries, that drained north through downtown Anderson and eroded that gully that you just saw. Here's an illustration of it. Here's Main Street. You see how it dips? I'm at 9th and Main right now, and here's 10th and Main, and there's 11th and Main. You see that dip that we're talking about? That was the valley. Happy Hollow. Now there's a nice place to be from. This is kind of sad though. Following the removal of the Catholic cemetery from the rear of the St. Mary's Church in the 1860s, squatters moved there and scratched out an existence in a place called Happy Hollow. No records exist as to how long they were there, but a report of life lost there in a fire was recorded in 1877. I delved into that and found out it was a little 6-year-old girl whose dress caught fire. It was here right behind the St. Mary's Church, was Happy Hollow, and this area right here. Of course, that cemetery that was there, that later became Happy Hollow, that cemetery went out and is now across from St. John's Hospital on Brown Street. Scatterfield Village Very little is known about the location of Scatterfield Village. Sketchy information indicates it was a small cluster of houses, businesses, and a one-room schoolhouse in the area near the intersection of today's 53rd Street and Scatterfield Road. No time frame is known. Talking about this area right here, this is Scatterfield Road, this is 53rd Street. Right here sits IHOP, and right on that corner was a schoolhouse, River Forest, Woodlawn Heights, and Country Club Heights. This is interesting, folks. There are 3 unique areas in Anderson Township. They are unique because all 3 are officially classified as separate towns, yet are located within the city limits of Anderson. According to the 2010 U.S. Census, River Forest on the West 8th Street is 0.02 square miles, consisting of 9 households with a population of 22. Here's River Forest, and a ground shot to the entrance of it. Woodland Heights on Van Buskirk Road is 0.12 square miles, consisting of 34 households and a population of 79. Again, this is according to the 2010 census. I've not looked at the 2020 census, so this information probably has been updated, but it would not be too far off. It first appeared in the 1930 census with a population of only 19 folks. And we're talking about, in Woodlawn Heights, we're talking about Van Buskirk Road. We're talking about Madison Avenue, Van Buskirk Road, the White River, and the beginning of Grandview. That area is Woodlawn Heights. And some shots that I took in Woodlawn Heights. I'm telling you, I don't think there's an area in Anderson in the fall that's any prettier than along Van Buskirk Road. Country Club Heights on North Madison Avenue, it's 0.28 square miles, consisting of 35 households with a population of 79. First appeared in the 1960 census with a population of 83. Country Club Heights basically runs from the river, Madison Avenue, and the railroad. This area here is known as Country Club Heights. Again, another pretty area. Yesterday and today, we're wrapping up some scenes from Anderson from years past. This is at the southwest corner of 10th and Jackson Streets. Today it is a title company. This is the Dr. Chittenden's home at the southeast corner of 11th and Central Avenue. And this is the northwest corner of 10th and John. And this is the Sandsbury home. And this is Mays Park. This home is no longer there. If you go down to Mays Park today, on this side of where that house was is a brick 2-story house with white columns. And next to it in the lot was the Sandsbury home. He had a daughter, Millie, who married Isaac May, who was the son of Major Isaac May from Anderson, who was killed during the Civil War. His son married her, and then when her parents died, they occupied the house, and that's the origin of the name Mays Park. The Wellington Mills, they were down at the corner of 5th and Main, where Fred Welker Ford used to be, and most recently Boots Casket Company was there. This is the Hickey Farm, where St. John's then is. And I think this is interesting. You see the Union Building, you know that's right across the street, but did you know that at one time in the 1870s, the Methodists had a church there? And that's it. From street level to the top of the spire was 310 feet. That is the length of a football field on end. Tallest building in Anderson at the time. Beautiful building. This is 8th Street and Sycamore. That White House used to have that log cabin on, and that log cabin was a place where people could stop and refresh themselves. It was a tavern. I'm not sure that they boarded people there, but it was a tavern. The people that lived there built that in 1839. And what's interesting is that in some research that I was doing, he said that in 1839 he counted the covered wagons traveling west on the Strawtown Road or 8th Street Road that passed his business. And in 1 year he counted 1,000 covered wagons. The Presbyterians had their church here on this corner. Interesting is they loved that steeple, so much so that when they built the present Presbyterian church on Chase Street, they took the steeple off of this and put it on top of their church today. That's the only church in Anderson that has 2 steeples. This is the home of Milton Robinson. He was a colonel in the Civil War. He lived here. And this home here was on this vacant lot down at 7th and Meridian Street. Schools: Eggman, Tollgate, Smoky Row, and Baker Moss Island. That's the Eggman School on West 38th Street, private home. That is the Tollgate School at the corner of Lindbergh and Alexandria Pike. That is the Smoky Row School. Believe it or not, it is a school. This is 29th Street. This is, well, right behind it is Denny Field, if you ever watched a football game at Denny Field. It was closed in 1905. City of Anderson annexed this side of 29th Street in 1905, and they took that school in and they immediately closed it and funneled those children to existing schools within the Anderson City School System. This is the Baker Moss Island School, also known, maybe you remember the name Bailey Chapel? Yeah. Bailey Chapel, that was a church. Bailey Chapel, and a gentleman that my wife and I go to church with, he bought that a number of years ago, remodeled it and everything, and he moved his mother-in-law, and his mother-in-law needed handicapped accessible, so he built all that for her. This is the corner of Moss Island Road and Gun Barn Road. Remembering our history. Interesting places around Anderson Township where our history has been remembered. This boulder used to sit on the lawn of the Pennsylvania Railroad Station on Fletcher Street. And that boulder, this is a postcard. They named it the Chief Anderson Rock because the plaque indicated that it was in a cabin near this spot was where Chief Anderson lived. It was a favorite place for people to get photographs of. In 1962, the Daughters of the American Revolution, who owned it, because the railroad station was closing down, they had to dispose of it, and a man by the name of Brindisi, Carol's father, wanted to buy it. And so he made arrangements with the daughters to buy the rock, and he moved it out to his property on 450 North. And that's where it sits today. The plaque went into the City Hall, and it's mounted beside the elevator on the first floor of City Hall. Well, I wrote a letter to Mayor Broderick. And I said, I think as a legacy project for our bicentennial, it would be nice to bring the plaque and the rock back to Anderson and put them on the lawn of City Hall, which is right across the street from where Chief Anderson's cabin was located. The first gas well in Anderson was drilled. Do you remember Evie's? That well went in where Evie's parking lot was located. The Buckeye Manufacturing Company on Columbus Avenue across from Stanton Park. The Camp Stillwell was a Civil War training camp at the entrance. This sign's at the entrance to Anderson Country Club. Training grounds were up on Anderson Country Club. Historic West 8th Street, a historical marker there denoting that era. The Grand Opera House over here where the police station is located. All of these signs have huge stories behind them, and we're not going to go into that today, but they are subject of other programs. The Main Street School, where the library is today. The First Methodist Church that I talked about, where the Tharp Cemetery, you just see the T for Tharp. The Moravian Mission marker out on East 10th Street. The public square, that's been painted. It stands outside the courthouse. Remy Electric down here at Dickman Town Park. The first railway system in Anderson, you recognize the old depot there. The Lambert House down at 7th and Hendrick Street. Across the street, by the way, was where the last public hanging in Anderson Township took place, November 1st, 1867. A man by the name of Milton White. And you recognize the Anderson's favorite, the Grunwald home, and can't say enough nice things about that or the work that Lisa and the whole people down there do. Finally, we're going to end up honoring those cemeteries in Anderson Township, and this work is done by Melody Hull, and I give her full credit for that. I acknowledge her, and it's with grateful appreciation I'll acknowledge her efforts in providing this information that follows. She and her husband worked tirelessly to build the website that contains this information, and it is a textbook in its own. The Bucco Cemetery, I won't labor you with where it's located, you can read that. The oldest known date of death there that we can read is May 8th, 1854. Doesn't mean there aren't people in there earlier, we just can't read the stones. Same way with the Harmison Cemetery. That's in Meadowbrook, if you didn't know. There's a cemetery in the middle of Meadowbrook. Oldest date there is April 11th, 1853. The Moss Cemetery, out along West 8th Street Road. The oldest date there is May 2nd, 1847. The Pleasant Walk, Wilson or Waggy Cemetery, west side of Madison Avenue. Oldest date there is September 23rd, 1824. You think of that. That's 198 years ago. And the St. Mary's Cemetery, again, it opened in 1867, and that date is the date of the man that was hung. He was the first burial. This is the Summit View or Gospel Trumpet or Church of God Cemetery in Park Place, and it is behind Warner Press. Oldest date there is 1908. Of course, West Maplewood, we talked all about that, so I won't belabor that there. Oldest known date of death, March 2nd, 1839. I think that was a question, wasn't it? The Whetstone Cemetery. Oldest date there is January 17th, 1867. Cemetery is destroyed at Bolivar, Hartley, Tharp, and the Waggy. And with that, we're done. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.